Hi there, this is Matt Heffernan and welcome back to my channel. This is a little different. I know this is a new episode of Slithy Vlogs number 27, and in this episode this can be more of a channel update, and I was running a little short on time this week to get a better produced vlog. I mean, it is supposed to be an informal, just a little bit of a chat, and yeah, it's going to be even more informal than usual. No slides and no demos today. But I've got a few questions and a few updates and just a little conversation for us to have. First up, I want to thank everybody for the support for my Z80 Assembly tutorial series. The last episode has been doing very well for that series. Obviously, a lot of curiosity there about how the ROM in the Spectrum works from a assembly viewpoint. Of course, it's mainly made for BASIC, but this gave you a little bit of a behind the scenes of how it actually works, what's in there, and how you can use it for assembly. So if you haven't seen that yet, go back to the channel and check that out. And I think it's pretty interesting. It came out fairly well, and people seem to enjoy it. So that, of course, that series is going well, and I'm also still, of course, working on several games. So I thought I'd give a bit of an update on where some of those games are, but also the other sort of main sub-series on the channel. What's been bringing a lot of folks here, of course, is the 8-bit Battle Royale. So I want to lead off really with a question, sort of an informal poll, and you can respond down in the comments. Is what should I do next? I've been kind of at a loss because I've ran through this sort of normal expected progression where I started with BASIC on all these different platforms and then moved on to assembly language and implementations. And then from there, seeing, well, which ones were doing best. And of course, the classic micros, we had the BBC micro doing the best, and then we had some of the newer, modern retro machines like the Commander X16 and the Spectrum Next and the Mega 65, and having demos for those, still 8-bit machines, but far more capable and able to run through this fractal calculation very quickly. So the question is now is where to take it. So I feel it would be a bit anticlimactic. I was thinking before, well, maybe we'll see how things do with C. So say we have CC65 and then a Z80C compiler, and see how these different machines will react to the same C code that's portable enough to run between these different compilers for different architectures. And then that C code could then be also ported to another system that's maybe not necessarily an 8-bit system, and that the only differences within these would be sort of creating sort of an API in C for accessing the graphics on these different systems. So sort of a plot API, if you will, where it's, here's a XY coordinate and here's a color. And the baseline for that, of course, would be the Spectrum, where we're talking about a 32 by 24 bitmap, effectively, because that's the kind of color scheme we have with the Spectrum. Or we could do sort of a dithering arrangement, kind of like I did with the NES demo, and have more colors and more resolution coming out of that. So there's different ways of approaching that by moving to C and having even more portable code, even perhaps even more portable than BASIC, and being able to abstract away by virtue of using a higher level language or at least higher level than assembly language, and being able to abstract away some of the graphics parts and try to create nice tight C code for each of those platforms. But I mean, that's going to be a lot of work, just as doing the assembly was a lot of work. But these, of course, were systems that were made to be programmed in assembly. So when you're dealing with just poking little values into screen memory or accessing some sort of graphics hardware and writing to registers in that. It's kind of what they were made to do, and that sort of thing is actually easier to do, at least in my opinion, with assembly. So I don't know. I'm not really convinced that that's the way to take it. Another thing I've considered is doing a different benchmark. There is another one that was actually very common back in the day, which was this calculation of prime numbers. So will that actually be interesting enough for a video? Because it's just like a few numbers flashing on the screen. You don't get the pretty picture like with the Mandelbrot set. So that's not too enticing either, unless I could come up with, say, a different plot, but it's not different enough or interesting enough. And then if we were to go further into sort of more of a modern graphical benchmark, like you see for testing like modern GPUs and modern systems, and they are sort of cross-platform. You can run similar benchmarks on PCs running Windows or Linux, or you could run it on a Mac, or you could run it on something that's, say, ARM-based running Chrome OS or what have you. And that would be interesting. But once we start going back to these 8-bit computers, the differences in their graphical capabilities are so that it's really difficult to do a direct apples to apples comparison. You're going to have a very specific character of those graphics for those different systems, and to come up with a sort of a lowest common denominator for graphics is going to be really hard and consequently pretty lame. So I am then really toying with the fact that maybe the 8-bit Battle Royale is done. I think I'll still have little callbacks here, trying out different 8-bit systems that I haven't done before. Of course, people keep suggesting systems that I have done before because they haven't come back and watched all the series. Like, yes, I've done the Atari 800. It's covered. You can see the basic one. I didn't bother doing the assembly because it's not as fast as the BBC Micro. Sorry. And that's just the way that it goes. But there's, of course, more to retro than 8-bit. And really at this point, 16-bit is just as retro. And we're really just talking about shifting a bit. In fact, very largely over to 16-bit microcomputers means that things even like the TI 994A is a 16-bit computer. People sort of lump it in with the 8-bits because it was really no better than the 8-bit competition. But technically it is a 16-bit computer, so really putting that in the 8-bit Battle Royale is, it wouldn't be fair. I don't know. I don't know if it would outperform, but it's not an 8-bit computer. It would be able to do 16-bit processing on these fixed point values, which is something you just can't do with these other systems. But then, of course, you'd also have things like the IBM PC. Even though you have an 8-bit bus, you still have internal 16-bit math that you can do. And then, of course, all of these other 16-bit systems that are 68,000 based, so that they actually have internal 32-bit capabilities with a 16-bit external data bus. And I think having a 16-bit Battle Royale would be very interesting, especially when you talk about the main three 68,000 based systems, of course, being the Apple Macintosh, of course, that's the original Macintosh, and then the Atari ST, and of course the Commodore Amiga. And the ST and the Amiga, much more similar. They had color graphics right from the very beginning. That original 68K Mac, of course, was monochrome, not even grayscale, just straight up black or white, nothing in between. So you could go for a later 68,000 based color Mac system and generate a fractal with that. In fact, Mac was a very early adopter. Once they went color, there was nothing in between the monochrome, just pure black and white, no grayscale, and then boom, 256 colors. There was never any sort of in between when it came to the Macintosh line. Whereas on the Apple II line, of course, you had the progression up to the Apple II GS, where you had a very interesting thing. And of course, the 2GS would also be in that. And I think it would also be interesting to see how the Apple II GS would compete with the Macintosh. Of course, the Macintosh couldn't do it in color. We would have to do a dither pattern based plot. And I'm sorry, it's going to work against the Mac's sort of its time is going to be spent dealing with these patterns and putting out those different pattern bits. I don't know how much it really would, because again, I haven't done the benchmark. So let me know down in the comments which you think is the best way to go. Do we try to do C? Do we just keep doing more new systems? Do we come up with a different benchmark for the 8-bit? Or do we just push right in to a 16-bit Battle Royale and maybe really get some of these different camps butting heads a bit more? So yeah, let me know what you think about that. Otherwise, I've, of course, had a few other videos come out recently about some of the games that I've been working on. What I've been working on most recently, and what I was hoping to get a video ready for, and I think that's going to have to come next week, is an update on my game Wordslide, which, of course, is a word-based puzzle game. Very much like another extremely popular game that was bought by a major American media conglomerate. But I'm creating an open source version that you can run on an 8-bit computer, and the new version, it is being compacted and fit onto a 16K cartridge so that you can play it on a VIC-20. So yeah, not just a 40-year-old computer, a 42-year-old computer that is even more simple and has very little RAM. So instead, we're going to try to get it on the ROM, and I'm going to have a video talking about what the different technical challenges are of taking a game, creating it for the Commodore 64. It was a lot easier where you have this, embarrassment of riches of a 64K machine. And to really do a game like this where you have about 2,500 five-letter words to choose from, that eats up quite a bit of memory. Just that word list takes up like 13K, and you don't have that on a VIC-20. And in fact, even on a cartridge, the cartridge is sort of split up into these sort of 8K segments, and you can't even fit it on that. So I sort of had to compromise and come up with a new strategy, and so now I have a way of making the word list fit on an 8K segment, and then the rest of the game, which is just the actual game code itself, is just over 4K, and getting all of that to sort of work in these two 8K segments on a VIC-20. And I'm going to show you how I did that next week, and hopefully with a demo of that VIC-20 version. So I think that'll be pretty interesting. Probably of less interest based on the viewer response is Movopoly, my mobile web game that is an update of Monopoly. And I hope to have a more compelling demo for the next one. I've got to get back to doing some more development on that. I'm going to be working with my daughter some more on that and defining how the game is going to work, getting some more of the mechanics nailed down for that. And I want to be able to have a video, and certainly on her channel, of sort of showing how the physicality of the game is going to work, how this is really changing it up from your standard Monopoly type game. And I think it's going to be interesting. And once we see, kids running around playing a game that is based on real estate development. I think it's kind of interesting. Meanwhile, other games that I have in development are mostly dormant at this point. I do plan on getting back to them in case you are coming to my channel after finding some videos for these games. And it's like, well, hey, where's the update on that? Chase Vault, of course, the first game that I started, showing off on this channel, is basically done. But of course, the platform that it's developed for, the Commander X16, is in a state where the machine is just not going to be ready due to a lot of supply chain issues and in difficulty in getting the dev team to work on something where it's just not ready to hit the market anyway, or even acquiring the parts for being able to finish the latest revision of the prototype proves to be difficult. So there's a lot of stuff working against that. Hopefully those things become resolved soon, and I will create the actual proper release of the game. Of course, it will be open source, but I will be providing physical copies, actual SD cards with custom labels and a box and everything. So something that you can buy if you want to support my channel, support my development. And even though it's an open source game, you can go ahead and download the release when that comes out. You can download the current version, run it on the X16 emulator right now if you want to. But if you like having a game, if you like the physicality of the games, and if you're a retro gamer, chances are that's a good part of it. Everybody likes to have MAME and just downloading all the ROMs and playing the game, but it's also nice to re-experience that sort of thing where you had a big box game and here's that physical item, even though it's not a floppy disk, it's an SD card, and taking that SD card and then sticking it in the machine and booting it up to play the game. That's the experience I hope to bring, and that sort of just helps out me having better content on this channel, and then being able to create games like Cabby's Quest, where the game is too big for me to develop on my own, and to be able to just sustainably do it as an open source, free and open source project, where it does have to be a commercial game, but that does require a bit of upfront funding to be able to pay artists and composers and folks that I need help with on the game. It's just too much work for me to do, and a lot of work that I'm frankly not qualified for in order to achieve the level of quality that I want that game to have, a Sierra or LucasArts level game for the Commander X16. But again, X16, the delay of its release is affecting my desire and ability to be able to get a game out the door for that. But still, the plan is that once there is a clear path for the release of that X16 hardware, that I will have the full playable demo of that game available as at launch as a open source shareware, not open source, but a shareware type demo, a free shareware demo. Let's call it that. And that will be available when the X16 is available in a physical form. And of course, it will be available as a download to play on the emulator, and then have a similar deal where you'll have a big box release with the SD card, with the custom printing, and of course, patrons get a discount on that as well. All right, so those things are coming, and unfortunately, externalities are keeping me from being able to deliver these things in a timely fashion. Other games, like the Alice in Wonderland game for the Atari 2600. I haven't been doing much work on that lately because my priorities kind of got shifted away from that. There was a lot of interest in the 2600 game, and I still really enjoy the challenge of working on that platform, and I do want to get that game finished too. So what I'm seeing on the horizon is the Z80 Assembly tutorial series starting to wind down. I'm now past the assembly language instruction part of the video series and moving on to more platform specific dealing with the actual hardware outside the CPU and how we interact with that. And so there's not too many more episodes because it's a fairly simple machine, and we'll get into some more advanced topics about like different strategies for being able to create those games. But that's going to really sort of stretch out the series. I'm going to have a lot more time in between because I'm still in a learning phase on that platform, and I hope to have a Spectrum Next during that so that I can expand that series to talk more about Spectrum Next specific topics and covering the additional instructions that are on that Z80 variant that's running in FPGA on the Spectrum Next, and of course all the additional hardware, all these different video modes. It's a very complex machine, and I want to really explore that some more because I find it very, very fascinating. So we'll be getting to all of that, and but because of the production schedule relaxing a bit around that series, I'll be able to fit in developing some more of these games, picking those back up, so getting that Alice game finally finished as well, because that's going to be a fairly small game. It's like a sort of a boutique game, if you will, just a showing little vignettes, not terribly challenging, making a 2600 game for kids that kids today could play. That you put it in the cartridge again, making the cartridges probably through Atari Age, but we'll figure that out eventually, and being able to put that in the system, or if they're firing up, if they got a VCS, one of those new VCSs, and having it fire up on there, or even just an emulation, because it will still be free and open source. And you hand the kid the joystick or the gamepad or whatever they got, and they'll be able to play it, they'll be able to recognize it as Alice in Wonderland, and they'll get a sense of what gaming was like 40 plus years ago, and see how we can get this sort of simple game and have something nice that a young kid, like a 6-7-year-old kid, could go and play and enjoy, and maybe spark something in the back of their mind, like, hey, this is kind of neat. This is not like these modern games that I'm used to playing. This is of a different category, and there's a more of a homemade, a more of a simple, even like simpler than Minecraft, because there's still, Minecraft's a lot more complex than it looks. This is really just very, very simple and very pure, and I think it maybe not be for every kid, but certain kids, I think it'll spark some interest in. So that's what I hope to get out of that. All right. So that's where all these different game projects are, and I just wanted to end my video, if you're still here, with a bit of a personal story. So I grew up in a suburb of Syracuse, New York, on the western side of the city, and it is this town that I grew up in is the largest concentration of Ukrainian Americans in the United States. And so I grew up with a lot of Ukrainian kids, a lot of kids that had these funny names where most of the vowels were Y's and J's. And they had parents who spoke Russian, but they were learning to speak Ukrainian because their parents took their whole family out of their country to escape a lot of the persecution and cultural erasure that they were experiencing under the Soviet regime. And I was in high school when the Soviet Union finally fell, and Ukraine became a independent, sovereign country for the first time in a very, very long time. It had been part of the Russian Empire, of course, before it was the Soviet Union, and it's had a very difficult run. And just today, I was visiting my parents, and of course, they still live in the town that I grew up in. And there are multiple Ukrainian churches there. There's a Catholic Ukrainian church. It's an Eastern Rites Catholic church. So they have Christmas in January. They have a Pentecostal Ukrainian church. They actually took over an old psychiatric hospital. So it's this big campus of all these old dormitories, and they've turned it into this massive complex of buildings. And closest to my parents is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And my kids are always impressed because you go by and it has it's mostly a brick building, but it has these giant like gold-plated onion domes. It's this sort of a brass copper. My kids think it's gold. It's like, are those solid gold? These huge domes? No, it's not. But it shows the real pride that the Ukrainian American community has in their culture and their religion and the things that bring them together, including their cultural identity. And driving by that sign today at the church, the sign that says "Pray for Ukraine." So whether you believe in that or you just want to have good thoughts for the people of Ukraine and what they're going through today. So I wish them my best, and I know that they have the strength and the conviction to get through this and to maintain their identity and to continue to live another day. So on that, I wish you a good day, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.